Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So, One Piece chapter 1139 is out. If you guys haven't checked out that chapter yet, I suggest that you do so because I will be spoiling you. But now that you have, let's begin. Man, Elbaf literally has no chill. I understand that the majority of the community aren't gonna hype up this chapter as much as the last one because literally nothing in One Piece beats lore. The lore piece is real. But for me, the lore is really heavy. Both from like a thinking perspective and also I've been waiting for this information for so long that once you get it, there's a little bit of feeling of sadness. Did you guys feel that as well? It's almost like kind of being in shock. The pages are literally slapping you in the face. So I guess for me, it's just nice to get a chapter like this. Almost like a palate cleanser, where 100% I feel like I'm just having fun. So yeah, with that being said, I don't imagine an hour-long review today. Sorry about that, but I guess we'll see. But I do think that this chapter has a theme that we can explore that is not entirely obvious. So stick around and we'll connect the dots. This chapter focused exclusively on the strats Luffy, Zoro, and Nami as well as Road inside of the castle. They're snooping around for the key to Loki's cuffs, and they're not having much luck. So I just uploaded a theory about Elder Jarl. I'll include a link to that both in the description and at the end of this video. It's kind of important to my headcanon surrounding Elbaf right now. But essentially the idea is that Elder Jarl has been a traitor to Elbaf, potentially the person actually responsible for King Harold's death, and generally speaking pro-Loki. So with this in mind, some of the early dialogue of this chapter caught my attention. They were having difficulty searching this very large castle for the key, and Road is like, well honestly, the only people who'd probably know where to find it are a few of the graybeards like Elder Jarl. Luffy even wonders out loud, I wonder if he'd tell me if I asked. So of course our impression is that he would not do that, the Giants of Elbaf would not do that, and Road basically says that. There's no way he would. Just trying to free Loki is a heinous crime. Sometimes it works out that you upload a theory and then immediately after that there's like shit in the chapter that makes you go, this is one of those times. So basically if that theory is correct, this is the kind of conversation that we'll look back on in the future and be like, wow, it could not be any more ironic. Because I do think that Elder Jarl wants Loki to be free, but he can't say that. So I just want to make sure that we reiterate this. A recurring takeaway of Elbaf since we've been here is that the Giants are not as honorable and as honest as we thought for literally 1,000 chapters before now. So the Strats eventually make their way into the throne room, and they find the hidden cache of treasure which Nami is all too excited about. But they find it only to discover that it has already been pillaged. There is no actual treasure remaining. So the natural question this begs is who did it? And in my opinion, the realistic answer is some giant in Elbaf. The treasure was secreted away with the key to Loki's chains. It was not meant to be found. And Road even clarifies in this chapter that those that would know where the key are the graybeards of the village, i.e. older giants like Elder Jarl. Those entrusted with the protection of the key are the only ones who should know where the treasure room is. And even beyond that, all of this was found by moving the giant-sized throne, which would require some serious strength. And even taking the treasure from there to somewhere else would be a huge challenge for anybody who does not actually live in Elbaf. The reality, as I see it, is that somebody like Luffy, anybody who was just like stumbling upon the island of Elbaf, could have searched this castle for weeks, months, potentially forever, and never found the treasure room. How would you even know where to begin? For the Strats to even get this far required the help of a giant Road. So I believe that this chapter is trying to communicate to us that the villains, the thieves who stole the treasure are actually giants, with significant standing in Elbaf. Was it Elder Jarl or was it somebody else? At this point, we don't know. In fact, this treasure may be, all things considered, pretty inconsequential. All we can really say with some amount of confidence is it is probable that some giants are less trustworthy than they appear to be. And this aligns with a few other things that we know. Firstly, we know that Elbaf in the past celebrated pillaging as part of their cultural identity. Ripley and others have literally spelled this out to us. King Harold fundamentally changed Elbaf. Pillaging is a thing of the past, but probably not for everybody. Hell, you could even look at Luffy and Nami in the chapter. Remember, Luffy is like literally the sun god, the god of Elbaf. And he, or more specifically his crew Nami, is excited about taking the treasure. So we might be seeing firsthand where Elbaf got the idea that pillaging or stealing might not necessarily be a bad thing. Joy Boy was a pirate. And the other thing that we know is that this castle has been off limits to the giants of Elbaf for 14 years. We still don't understand why. As Road explains it, the castle is haunted, and Oda played with that a little bit in the chapter. But we've now been exploring the castle for a while. No ghosts so far. So maybe we should be asking whether or not this rumor was a lie, was made up, to keep people from discovering that the treasure has been stolen. Also, to keep the castle empty so that you could steal the treasure in the first place. But either way that you look at it, a lie is a lie, and the liars are giants. Although I really do hope that the castle is actually haunted. Please, let's make this real. I'm begging. But yeah, continuing with the chapter, there was an interesting interaction between Zoro and Luffy. And eventually we're gonna argue that this might be the most important panel in the entire chapter. That kind of helps explain what the point of the chapter really is. Road brings up that it's a great crime to attempt to free Loki, and Zoro says, "We haven't decided if we're gonna let him go yet." To which Luffy says, "You're no fun, Zoro." Look, I'm sure what I'm about to say might be controversial to some, but I'm not aware that the Straw Hat Pirates are a democracy. As I understood it, Luffy is the captain. And as per Zoro, pre-time skip, the captain's authority must be respected. I'm not saying that Zoro can't have his own opinion, and that Zoro can't offer advice. Although he should always trust Luffy's judgment when Luffy makes a decision. Undermining his agenda or objectives is insubordination. But he made it sound like they hadn't already decided what they're going to do. And he also made it sound like he has a significant say in the matter. But from my perspective, it appears as though Luffy has already decided. Very similar to Luffy and Zoe when he decided to go search out Sanji himself. But yeah, if you go back and you reread chapter 1136, it becomes clear exactly what's going on. Zoro wants to meet Loki before deciding whether freeing him is a good idea. His opinion is that Luffy is easily tricked, so Zoro wants to judge for himself, which Zoro has in fact done throughout the entirety of the story. Zoro didn't trust Nami. Zoro didn't trust Robin. Zoro didn't trust Vivi. Zoro doesn't trust much of anybody. And so we've had this conversation before, and many people are of the opinion that what Zoro is doing here is right. He's making up for Luffy's weaknesses. It's not that he doesn't trust Luffy, it's just that he knows what Luffy is not good at and will do those things for him anyway. Look, it's really hard for me to separate my bias here because I have a very strong opinion about how this should be interpreted. Zoro thinks that Luffy is easily tricked and is watching out for him. On the surface, this seems like a good idea. I can understand why Zoro has these thoughts. There was a time many years ago where I argued that Luffy should listen to Zoro in this regard. But the problem arises when you try to reconcile this with what has actually happened in the story. At the end of the day, in the vast majority, if not all of these situations, the people that Luffy kind of naively trusts end up becoming allies and good people. Because Luffy has a serious talent for judging character, even while he can be tricked. And it gets even more dumb when you consider an example which may not fit, like Kanjuro. Zoro's role is to watch Luffy's back and make sure that he is not tricked. But the literal one time in at least 1,000 chapters where this skill would have been useful, Zoro got tricked as well. I suppose you could also throw like Rob Lucci in there as well, from Water 7. Guys, I can't be alone in thinking that this interaction is important. There is some kind of captain-vice captain dynamics happening here that are not entirely resolved. Probably gonna end up saying this a lot, but we should be asking, what is the point? And frankly, we can already predict where this story is headed. Loki was just attacked by members of the God's Knights, including Figurlin Shamrock. He is most likely inches from death, meaning the Strats, if they arrive, they will almost definitely free him. So if we're gonna free him anyway, and judgment of his character really doesn't matter, what is the point? Why is Oda taking the time to make Zoro suspicious and essentially attempt to act the captain? This just reads to me as a potential source of conflict, and only serves to highlight that Zoro does not have complete trust in Luffy's judgment. Like every time that I say this, I get at least a few comments of people who absolutely hate it. They think that I'm hating on Zoro. But if you agree with Zoro, then you are admitting that Luffy's judgment in some respects is flawed, right? So it boils down to whether or not you trust Zoro or you trust Luffy. Should Zoro be a yes man to Luffy, or should he put his foot down? And if you think that he should put his foot down, is it worth a fight? Seriously, ask yourself this question, pose this hypothetical. Zoro meets Loki and decides, nah, this guy is not trustworthy, he is a deceiver, we should not free him. But Luffy wants to do it anyway. What should Zoro do then? The reality is that whether or not Luffy is wrong because he needs to trust Zoro, or whether Zoro is wrong because he needs to trust Luffy, depends on what happens, right? All I'm gonna say, guys, is that I think that Zoro desperately needs a dub. With the possible exception of Whiskey Peak, every single time that Zoro has attempted to do this throughout the entirety of the story, he has been wrong. And even Whiskey Peak is debatable. Either way, we are 1,000 chapters from the last time that this was in any way useful. Otherwise, Zoro's just levied the stink eye at a bunch of characters and then ultimately realized that Luffy's initial judgment was right. And like, let's be honest, even if Zoro doesn't trust anybody, that Luffy is not going to be persuaded unless he feels that way himself. So I really hope that we get something interesting and different out of this. This just feels like a setup to something. And if you've been following the channel for a really long time, you'll know that I see a lot of potential in dynamics such as this. And I guess my opinion boils down to, should Zoro babysit Luffy as the captain or not? Or what possible middle ground can we find? We'll come back to this though later. But anyway, the Strat's adventures eventually led them to the throne room as we have previously discussed. But the throne room itself was kind of interesting. Firstly, they speculated that the damage in the throne room looks a lot more recent and that there is a hole in the ceiling. This feels somewhat important, but I'm not entirely sure in what way. Was the damage caused by the summoning of Shamrock, or is it related to something else? Like I said, it can go either way, but my feeling is that the hole in the ceiling might have something to do with the missing treasure. Whoever stole it did not go through the front door. We do see a very interesting claw mark though. A claw mark which might remind you of Shanks' scar. But we know Shanks got his scar from Blackbeard. The similarity here though I think is still worthy of thinking about. Is Oda foreshadowing Loki's fruit? Or somebody else? I believe that we will find out. But the real thing that I want to highlight is the summoning circle. Guys, we already know that this is the circle that Figurlin, Shamrock, and Gunko used to arrive in Elbaf. What we do not know is when it was drawn. I understand that we have seen these summoning circles appear before with the Gorosei, but if you recall, when the Gorosei were summoned, the circles did not stick around, and they didn't need to be within them in order to travel back to Imu, which makes this circle appear to be a bit different. Rhodes says this: "I've seen these in books before. It looks like a magic circle. They apparently use them in rituals to summon demons in some countries." And this is actually something that we've already seen in the story. Brook, pre-time skip, was basically teleported using Kuma's powers and arrived at a random island where the people there were attempting to draw one of these circles and summon the devil. But instead they got Brook, which is still hilarious to this day. So I guess this has created a theory in my mind. The magic circle technology is real. These circles do not just appear when Imu uses their powers to send their subordinates to places. People can draw them, and they can be used. The lore of some countries using them to summon demons is real lore. So our thought was that the circle just appeared recently when Shamrock arrived. But this seems to open the door for the possibility that the circle was actually drawn beforehand. Shamrock merely used it. Again, in the recent Elder Jarl video, we speculated that if you had an issue with the country of Elbaf becoming pacifist, that it might be an intuitive idea to invite invaders to your country to remind everybody of the value of being a warrior. And we went on to speculate that perhaps Figurlin Shamrock is here because of Elder Jarl. So this could work to substantiate that idea. Somebody in Elbaf drew this circle, conveniently in the throne room that nobody is allowed to enter, and nobody is just going to randomly stumble upon, allowing the world government to send non-Gorosei to the country of Elbaf undetected. But yeah, we're like focusing on this and its importance in Elbaf, but the idea that people could potentially all across the world draw these summoning circles related to Imu's powers or whatever, there's like a history of this, is kind of a reveal, is it not? We might be getting a window a little bit into the Void Century, where this knowledge of pentacle summoning circles was more widespread and utilized. But yeah, if this theory is true, I think an important component of it is whether or not the circle can be erased. Was it drawn with magic or was it drawn with paint? Can you break it so it cannot be used? Potentially, a battle here might reveal the truth. And as it turns out, a battle is imminent. But yeah, not a bad transition to the actual hype part of the chapter. The Straw Hats hear a mysterious voice, which they initially confuse as the voice of like a spirit of the dead, but they actually discover belongs to a man. The mysterious man in the Straw Hat. The man marked by flames, as we guessed for quite a long time now, Scopper Gaban of the Roger Pirates. We dreamed for days like this. Let's freaking go. This is just as good as when we first met Rayleigh. And honestly, I'm just gonna say it, this is even better than meeting Rayleigh, because, I'm gonna say something that'll piss people off. Rayleigh is not that interesting. Sorry, not sorry. Rayleigh is extremely cool. Love Rayleigh. Not a particularly interesting character. Scopper, on the other hand, seems like layers, and I'm all about it. In this chapter, we learn that Scopper Gaban was the left arm or the left wing of the Pirate King, described in a very similar way as Zoro and Sanji to Luffy. And I would guess that everybody's first impression of Scopper is that he's very similar to Sanji. We get this whole hilarious tangent about how Scopper has a relationship with the giant Ripley, literally has a half-giant son, and how all of that would work, and he basically announced himself as a missionary of love. So Scopper Gaban was Gol D. Roger's Sanji. From this, you would then assume that we should be comparing Rayleigh and Zoro, right? Two wings of the Pirate King, Scopper Gaban and Rayleigh. With Luffy, it is Sanji and Zoro. But I think that we know Rayleigh a lot more than we know Scopper Gaban, and never once have I thought that Rayleigh reminds me of Zoro. Not once have I had that thought. If your thoughts have been different, please let me know in the comments. Let me know, like, the events that Rayleigh has had so far that made you think, man, Rayleigh is definitely a Zoro-like figure. I understand he uses a sword. I understand that he advises the Pirate King. But these are two very general things. Aside from that, I don't see Rayleigh and Zoro as being similar at all. Which at the least you have to admit is very different from our immediate impression of Scopper. The immediate impression is like, this dude is Sanji. Don't remember that with Rayleigh. So with this in mind, I actually had a very unusual thought as I read this chapter. Scopper Gaban is not just Sanji. Scopper Gaban is a combination of both Sanji and Zoro. He represents both of them. The love thing, in my opinion, is very obvious. But on the other hand, through the events in this chapter, you kind of get the sense that Scopper is a little bit bloodthirsty, a little bit unhinged, kind of like a beast. He's eager for a fight, which defines Zoro and absolutely not Sanji. I mean, literally the first thing that he does when we meet him is he chucks his giant axe at them. It just seems to me to be a thing that Zoro might do, not really Sanji. Sanji is supposed to be the kindest person. He's not testing people to see if they're worthy. That is what Zoro does. But yeah, I guess I'm just struggling with a proper way to describe this. When I think Rayleigh, I think wise. At no point have I ever thought that Rayleigh was a fool. But this is a common thought that you have with Zoro. Like, obviously, he thinks a lot about himself, and he knows what's up, and he makes great decisions and has great judgment. Like, Zoro's view of himself is very high. Meanwhile, the whole crew is aware that Zoro is also a large part idiot. He, just the same as Sanji, have moments of wisdom, and more than just moments of foolishness. Does that make sense? I'm not saying that Rayleigh couldn't have been like Zoro in the past. Obviously, we're lacking a lot of story about Rayleigh in the first place, but we just haven't seen it. So I guess we'll see if this stands up over time, but this could actually end up being some subliminal messaging. Luffy's crew does not have an equivalent of Silver's Rayleigh. And I kind of wonder whether this is the point of the chapter, the theme which ties everything together. Meeting Scopper is awesome, it's exciting, it's good fun. But what it may serve to highlight is how the Roger Pirates and the Strats are different. And potentially what makes Luffy and the Strats a better pirate crew. Or if I have to remove my bias, potentially what makes them a worse crew. If I remove my bias. It's incredibly cool to think of Silver's Rayleigh as the Dark King because he's ruling from the shadow of Roger. Basically, Roger and Rayleigh had a dynamic between them different to Luffy and Zoro. Maybe with Rayleigh, there were significant times in which he said no and it didn't happen. More like a straight up captain, vice captain, or captain, co-captain situation than we really see on the Strats. Look man, I know that a lot of people think that Zoro is the vice captain of the Strats. This is a whole ass conversation, it's a thing and it can be quite toxic, in my opinion. But as I personally see it, there is not really a vice captain because everyone performs their roles based on their expertise. So really, I guess the question is does the Strat Pirates require a vice captain? An officially titled person? A lot of people will say definitely yes, in part because they just want their favorite character to be vice captain. But there could be some downsides. Is it possible that Silver's Rayleigh held Gol D. Roger back? Remember, the Roger Pirates were noteworthy pirates for approximately 25 years, and it took all 25 of those years for Roger to become the Pirate King and find Laugh-Tale. Luffy is going to accomplish what Roger did in less than 2 years of actual sailing. How exactly is he accomplishing this crazy feat? Well, it has a lot to do with a number of incredibly dumb decisions. Adding the cat burglar Nami as navigator, something Zoro would not have done. Adding the poneglyph interpreter Robin, another thing that Zoro would not have done. By the way, getting Sanji back was important. Zoro wouldn't have done that. Oh, at the same time, this forced Luffy to go to Whole Cake Island where he got one of the road poneglyphs. And we're not even including all the trouble that Luffy has gotten himself into that have ultimately made him stronger and prepared him for further steps along the adventure. So we have effectively saved a ton of time through a bunch of idiotic decisions made by Luffy. That's all I'm saying. It's possible that if Luffy had chosen to listen to a voice of reason like Rayleigh, it would slow the adventure. So we're kind of building an argument as for why the Strats do not have a Rayleigh. And this could interrelate with that prior discussion about Zoro. You might argue, well, Zoro is trying to be Silver's Rayleigh, but has not really been good at it ever. Maybe he needs to get better, or maybe he's just not that guy. And we don't need a character in this role. But yeah, I hate talking in circles, but I do just want to be clear here. Luffy does listen to his crewmates, depending on what they specialize in, their strengths. When crazy weather arrives, Luffy defers to Nami. When it comes to food, Luffy defers to Sanji. When it comes to medicine, he defers to Chopper, so on and so forth. Luffy has unabashedly acknowledged that there are things that he does not know, that he cannot do, and that he relies on the crew. But it seems to me that Zoro believes that his role on the crew is to be distrustful, because it's something that Luffy cannot do, and it leads to him getting tricked. But it's just one of those weird cases where Luffy does not listen to Zoro, and instead chooses to go on his own path, which singles it out as like a weird dynamic. I literally cannot think of another one like it within the Strat crew, and it feels unresolved. So with the Roger Pirates here, it feels like a natural thing to think about. Honestly, this was my biggest takeaway from the chapter. But yeah, I guess we've gotten away from Scopper. Scopper being a combination of both Sanji and Zoro, I think is just fuel for a lot of epic moments, and also hilarious ones. Because like, Sanji and Zoro do not like each other. So I feel like both Sanji and Zoro are very much not gonna like Scopper, for very different reasons. And then also be confused because there's aspects of them that they like. I'm here for it. But yeah, the whole reason that Scopper is here is because he sensed the haki of Figurlin Shamrock and Gunko's arrival. And I'm just thinking to myself, man, he took his sweet ass time to get here, did he not? Really couldn't have been any more lackadaisical. But then at the same time, we were in the castle and he was outside of the castle, then suddenly he's in the throne room and has passed everybody up. So like, when did that happen? But yeah, long story short is he's here, he meets the Strats, discovers that they are after Loki, and Loki's key, then decides to hold it hostage and challenge them for them to take it from him. So Luffy versus Scopper is imminent. But yeah, let's just take a moment to appreciate that the Strats clearly did not care at all about Scopper Gaban. Literally in the room with an all-time legend. He starts talking and they're like, nah. You want to hate him for it, but you really can't. So yeah, I feel like Power Scalers might particularly like this chapter. This is totally fan service for the people that wanted to see where Luffy might stack up with Rayleigh right now. But yeah, the whole justification for it is that Loki is really strong. Really strong. And Scopper seems to respect this a lot, essentially telling us that up until now, the only person who's really been able to deal with Loki is Shanks. So if they're gonna free him, Scopper seems to want to be sure that they can actually deal with him. Through this, it's implied that Scopper Gaban himself would be unable to subdue Loki in case he turns out to be the bad guy. So now we are officially gapping the legends. The students are surpassing the masters. Honestly, guys, I'm excited to see how this plays out. I mean, clearly, I think most of the community is going to agree that Luffy at this point should be stronger than Scopper because Luffy needs to be strong enough to defeat Loki. But I'm sitting here and I feel like I'm just as excited as everybody else to figure out, like, in what exact way will this matchup work? My headcanon for the longest time is that haki just matters more than everything else. Battles in One Piece come down to will. So Luffy now has advanced armament, he has advanced observation, and he has advanced conquerors. But I also feel like there should be tiers to this. Has Luffy maxed out these attributes or not? I feel like Scopper probably has, at least to his level of willpower. But then we've also seen Shanks recently, and some of the things that Shanks is doing does not appear to be in Luffy's wheelhouse, at least not yet. So there still should be room to grow. On the other hand, physical strength does matter, in combination with your abilities in haki. Scopper Gaban is now an old man. Yes, he is very strong, but there's no doubt that he is weaker than he once was. And physical speed and physical strength can equalize to some degree. As just an example, you could use advanced observation to see what an opponent is about to do, but you actually have to be fast enough to react to that. So my opinion is that Luffy in Gear 5th, I assume that he's gonna go Gear 5th, I hope so. That moment, just thinking about it, man. Whew. But yeah, I hope that he does. And I feel like Luffy's advantage of speed and strength while in Gear 5th is gonna be a big difference. If Luffy's haki is on par with Scopper, then the battle should not last very long. But if Scopper's haki is greater, could prove to be a challenge. I'm actually curious if anyone out there thinks that Scopper might win this. If Luffy is pushed all the way to Gear 5th, we know that there is some time limit using that power. So he's gotta steal the key before the clock runs dry. It would be insanely wild if Scopper just won. Not predicting that. I'm just saying hypothetically. That would catch a lot of people off guard. But yeah, I want to make sure that we actually talk about this. Mentioned this earlier, but when we see Scopper, he has a scar on his face which looks a lot like a flame. And it is now pretty clear that Scopper is the man marked by flames. This is important for a number of reasons. The obvious of this is that rumor has it that the man marked by flames is aware of where the final road poneglyph is. We will find the final road poneglyph in Elbaf. This is very nearly 100% confirmed. But even more important than this are the characters that are interested in finding the man marked by flames. The first of these characters was Eustace Kid and Killer. Rip to the homies. But the other group that have mentioned the man marked by flames is the Blackbeard Pirates. Blackbeard basically breaks it down in chapter 1081. They're looking for the road poneglyphs, and they knew that Kaido and Big Mom each possessed one, and they knew that the man marked by flames guarded another. After these events, Blackbeard fought Law and acquired essentially the rubbings of 3 of the poneglyphs. So like Luffy, they are missing one, and they know roughly where to look. I'm telling you guys, this is all setting up the Blackbeard Pirates arriving to Elbaf. In my opinion, they did not bring up the man marked by flames for no reason. The rumors should lead them here. So just another thing to potentially be excited about. But yeah, I only really have 2 other things to say. As kind of suggested in the last chapter, there's a mystery about where Adam's Wood comes from. And we made a theory that Scopper Gaban is secretly cutting down Treasure Tree Adam. He's the one that's providing the Adam's Wood to the black market. While there's no visible signs of damage to the tree where the giants live, we know that more of the tree exists underwater. Could be underwater where we find missing chunks of the tree. So now that we suspect that he is the man marked by flames, you can go back to what the Blackbeard Pirates were saying about him, and suddenly it's like, oh. The rumor is that the man marked by flame rides in an all-black ship that swallows enemies in a gigantic vortex should they wander too close. So Scopper supposedly has some kind of vortex power, but really it could just relate to his strength underwater. All of this lines up nicely with my theory. Why exactly is Scopper trolling around Elbaf in an all-black ship, creating vortexes? Could have something to do with chopping down Treasure Tree Adam. Thought that it was interesting as they were discussing the legend of Scopper, then part of that legend involved being an incredible deforester. Another one of those moments where you make a theory, then the next chapter comes up with some things that just make you go, And lastly, I just want to draw your attention to the absence of King Harold. Look man, we said this like from the moment that we got into the castle, once we saw all the dead bodies of all the giant warriors that were left there. King Harold should be here somewhere. Seeing his most likely impressive skeleton should be a moment. But the Strats have been trolling around the castle for some amount of time now, and we haven't found him. Just have this internal gut feeling that there is some conspiracy involved with King Harold's death, and finding or not finding the body could be significant. I also want to shout out my thumbnail artist, Azazel. I'm not sure how much I've shared on the channel about him, I've struggled remembering everything that I do or say, but he's a refugee in Egypt from Sudan, and he has an incredible story about how he nearly died in Sudan, basically a casualty of war, and it was a story that ended up in the news. If you want to ask him about it on X, feel free, link in the description. It is an insane story, but my man literally almost died, and he's still struggling to recover from those injuries, making work very difficult. There's also a lot of things happening around the world regarding immigration and all sorts of stuff, it affects the United States, it's affecting other parts of the world as well. So he could really use your guys' help. If you are interested in commissioning artwork from him, please do so. You guys do not understand how much it would mean to him. For obvious reasons, he does not wish to return to Sudan, but the whole process is fraught with BS. Link to his X in the description. But yeah, guys, I really enjoyed this chapter, and I'm really excited for the next one. Totally apologize for the scattered brain review. This didn't feel like my best work, but it do be like that sometimes. As always, I'm curious as to what you guys think, whether you know something from the chapter that I might have missed. Just share your thoughts. Remember to like the video, subscribe, click the bell to be notified, join the squad, and as always, guys, have a wonderful day.